Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to completely dismantle everything you thought you knew about how Roman women looked and dressed. You know, when we think of antiquity, it's so easy to just fall back on assumptions handed down by pop culture, rather than actually digging into the hard, physical evidence left behind in the dirt. So today, we're cutting through the noise. We're going to look strictly at the archaeological record from the 1st and 2nd centuries CE to rebuild the vibrant, complex, and incredibly regional reality of the women living in the Roman Empire.
Okay, picture a Roman woman in your mind right now. Go ahead. Chances are you're picturing a total Hollywood cliché. You're probably imagining someone wrapped up in a crisp white bedsheet with loose flowing hair, wearing strappy leather sandals, maybe wandering through some pristine marble courtyard, right? It's an incredibly pervasive image. But the truth is, this whole white bedsheet Rome aesthetic, it's a complete modern failure. That was absolutely not their actual ancient wardrobe.
So let's dive into this and finally trade in those fictional white drapes for the vibrant, messy, and honestly fascinating archaeological reality. The most crucial point we have to establish right out of the gate is that there is literally no such thing as a single, universal Roman woman. I mean, the Roman Empire spanned massively diverse climates and cultures. We've got dense portrait imagery from Italy, sure, but we also have exceptionally preserved organic materials like leather and wood pulled straight from the mud of Britain. We have brilliantly painted mummy portraits out of Egypt, and huge amounts of local metalwork from the Danubian provinces. To understand the historical reality, we have to look at what women actually wore in those specific, hyper-local places.
If we're going to get this right, any responsible reconstruction absolutely has to lock down 5 crucial variables before a single piece of clothing is even chosen. You can't just pick and choose items from a giant grab bag of Roman stuff. You have to know the exact date, the specific province. You need to know her legal and social status. Was she an elite citizen, a freedwoman, or a soldier's partner? How wealthy was she? And what's the context? Is she at a formal ritual, or is she working in a muddy frontier fort? You have to build a persona. And honestly, one of the biggest traps modern interpreters fall into is letting literary labels outrun the actual material evidence.
Take the stola, for example. Roman literature absolutely loves to associate the stola with all married, respectable citizen women. But archaeology rarely hands us a complete, neatly labeled garment. Because the word stola is everywhere in elite texts, people just naturally assume every married woman from the streets of Rome all the way up to Hadrian's Wall was wearing one. But the material evidence begs us to exercise some restraint here. We really have to treat the stola strictly as an elite, formal register of dress. It's something worn by a wealthy Italian matrona for a public appearance, not some mandatory daily uniform for a soldier's wife living in a rainy provincial outpost.
So, what were they actually throwing on every morning? Well, forget the all-white columns. The real, secure base layer across almost all classes was the long tunic. And it was gorgeous, literally anything but boring. Thanks to the incredibly dry sands of Roman Egypt, we have preserved textiles and mummy portraits that absolutely prove these women loved vibrant color. We're talking deep red tunics, bold black decorative bands called clavi, rich purple and yellow striping, even hairnets woven from vibrantly multicolored sprang linen. Color was an everyday reality for them, not just some luxury fiction. Now get this number, 5,000. That is the staggering number of shoes dug up at the Vindolanda frontier fort in northern Britain. 5,000 shoes, and roughly 40% of those could have been worn by women and children. This site gives us just an unbelievable level of insight because it actually preserves the leather that usually just rots away in other climates. And what these shoes tell us completely shatters another massive myth about Roman dress.
The big takeaway here is that a soldier's partner living out in a freezing frontier fort was wearing highly practical, climate-aware leather shoes. It completely debunks that whole strappy sandals in the snow myth you see in movies. While an elite woman down in Rome might wear a fine open sandal, the solia, a woman up in Britain or Dacia was wearing closed leather shoes. They often had sturdy hobnails hammered in for traction, and they were covered in repair patches. We even have a beautifully preserved child's sock and a shoe insole from Vindolanda. Oh, and a fur-lined shoe found in Egypt. They dressed for the weather exactly like we do.
Which brings us to another massive identifier, hair. Honestly, hair is one of the most incredibly accurate date markers we have for Roman women, and it evolved drastically over a 200-year period. In the early 1st century, you see these simpler center parts and neat buns. But flash forward to the late 1st century, and the Flavian period introduces these towering, highly artificial architectural walls of curls. It's wild. Then, moving into the 2nd century, it stabilizes into these arranged Trajanic waves before shifting again into the elaborate braided and coiled styles of the Antonine empresses.
But here is our golden rule. Where evidence gets a little thin, always choose restraint. Sure, imperial portraiture shows us what court fashion looked like, but an ordinary craftswoman or a trader in a frontier town, she wouldn't be rocking imperial court-level hair architecture every single Tuesday. For the vast majority of women in provincial or military settings, simple braided buns, center parts, and hair pinned back with bone or bronze under a mantle are way more accurate than trying to emulate a Flavian empress while, managing a busy household.
And as we travel up to the northern provinces, the whole way women fasten their clothing flips entirely. Down in Italy, elite imagery doesn't really highlight brooches very often. But up in places like Roman Britain, the Rhine, or Dacia, local enameled brooches, known as fibulae, become this massive, practical part of a woman's everyday toolkit. They were absolutely essential for pinning thick, heavy cloaks against the freezing cold, and they featured really strong, distinct regional styles and local metalwork. You simply cannot strip a frontier woman of her local brooches. It was a huge part of her visual identity.
Now, beyond just the practical clothing, the archaeological record gives us these intensely personal, almost kind of kawaii-adjacent, protective items. Women wore things that were deeply tied to their specific life stages and physical safety. A perfect example is the lunula. It's this gold crescent pendant heavily associated with protecting girls and young women. We also find these incredible magical gems used for safe pregnancy. And there's even a breathtaking Romano-British gold lamella, which is a magic charm for safe childbirth that explicitly names the woman it belonged to, Fabia. These aren't just old artifacts, they are literal, direct connections to the very real fears and hopes of ancient women. The things these women actually carried around instantly broadcast their status and their daily reality too. Everyday objects like ring keys and writing tablets show us working women actively managing busy frontier households. Actually, tablets from Vindolanda give us the earliest known Latin handwriting by a woman in Britain. They were spinning fiber, managing household stores, writing letters. On the complete opposite end of the spectrum, accessories like non-folding parasols, the umbella, or extremely heavy gold jewelry were strict, elite status markers, and they were often carried by attendants. You definitely wouldn't find a market woman casually holding a parasol.
Put it all together, and the contrast is just mind-blowing. If you compare an elite Italian matrona from Pompeii right alongside a local Dacian woman, the differences are night and day. The Pompeian woman is wearing her formal stola. The fastenings are hidden. She has fine open sandals and this elaborate structured coiffure. But the local Dacian woman? She's wearing a practical tunic under a heavy local cloak, prominent enameled brooches, closed leather shoes, and a simple bun. If you try to dress that Dacian woman as just a cheaper version of the Pompeian woman, you are completely ignoring the archaeological evidence. There simply is no cookie-cutter Roman woman template.
So, if you want to truly understand these historical personas, or reconstruct them accurately yourself, it all boils down to a brutally simple 4-part verification rule. First, fix your variables. Second, demand strong, direct material evidence. Don't just rely on literary tropes. Third, if you're looking at a northern province, let the local footwear and brooches completely override those Italian marble statues you're used to seeing. And fourth, keep that hair strictly specific to the period. If you actually follow these rules, the honest reconstruction you get is narrower, vastly more local, and infinitely more convincing.
Ultimately, we really have to ask ourselves a pretty tough question when we look back at history. Are we using the hard archaeological evidence to see these vibrant, complex ancient women exactly as they really were? Or are we just projecting our own comfortable, cinematic Hollywood fantasies right back onto them? The dirt holds the truth. We just have to be willing to look at it. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and definitely keep questioning what you think you know.
Paloma,